think we're around text 59. Text 59, chapter 2. Vishaya vinivartante. The senses, they turn away. So the senses here are the subject of the sentence. It's kind of a poetic. The senses don't really, the sense objects turn away. Vishaya means sense objects. So sense objects are things in this world that you drink in through your senses. Your senses here refer to your knowledge acquiring senses. So taste, sight, touch, smell, and sound. They're essentially orifices through which you drink in or suck in the world. Sounds go into your ears, and smells go into your nostrils, and sights go into your eyes. Food goes into your mouth, and things that you touch, interface with and go in through the pores of your skin. And so the knowledge acquiring senses are the things that you suck in the world with. And then the things that are sucked in, those are the sense objects. And this is, there's no real simple term in English for Vishaya. Vishaya is a standard term in Sanskrit that's used in philosophical language, and it shows up again and again. Vishaya. And there it's the sense objects, but there's no simple English word which conveys that. You almost need to give a paragraph-sized definition to appreciate. Even the term sense objects, even we use two words, it still doesn't convey it, does it? It would mean the matter that is processed through your senses to give enjoyment to you in the world. Vishaya literally means objects. And so it's the thing that you are focused on in this world. And it carries with it like a whole philosophical worldview. That you are a soul, that you are spiritual, but you're in a body which is material. Hey, Anandini, take Naika with you. Go with Anandini. You are a soul that's non-material, but you're in a body which is material. And then that body gives you senses, and the soul, instead of focusing on spirit, focuses on matter and becomes overwhelmed by and entrenched with material things. And the things that you become entrenched with are things that you suck in through your senses and you identify with, and you derive enjoyment from them, which then turns you away from your real nature, which is spirituality. That's the philosophical baggage or worldview which is just automatically contained within the word Vishaya, which means object. And so in this sense, Vishaya means sense objects. It could also be an object of affection, an object of love more generally. Like somebody that you love would be called Vishaya. But then in relationship to the material world and the material body, it's really stuff that the soul misidentifies with and tries to enjoy. So Vishaya vinivartante. The sense objects, they turn away from you. So sense objects here is the subject of the sentence. Now, do sense objects turn away from you? No. What happens is that you turn away from sense objects. They're inert. They're just there. They don't turn towards you or turn away from you because they're inert matter. So rather, you can choose to turn away from them, or not to identify with them, or not to become infatuated with them. But here poetically it says, they turn away from you. Vishaya vinivartante nir aharasya dehinaha. They turn away from the embodied soul who's fasting. Ahar means to eat, nirahar means to fast, dehina means to possess a body. So for the person, dehi means to possess a body, dehina means of the person who possesses a body. So for the person who has a body, who's fasting, the sense objects, they turn away from you. Is that what happens? What happens, Ross?
You turn away from the sense object.
You get it? But it's kind of a poetic thing to say, right? Oh, I'm muted? Oh my God. Sorry, guys. Nobody bothered unmuting me. So I've just been talking the whole time without being unmuted. Yikes. I don't know what to do there. I think I'm just going to sally forth. So, Vishaya vinivartante. The sense objects, they turn away from you, nir aharasya dehina, from the fasting embodied soul. And again, the word Vishaya is a very generic term in Sanskrit that means object, but in a philosophical context, it means an object that you attempt to drink in with your senses. Essentially through an orifice in your body, your eyes, things that you see, your ears, things you suck in, they get the sound of it, your mouth, things you eat, the pores of your skin, things you touch, and your nostrils, things you inhale. Our olfactory senses not so well developed. Our sense of smell. A dog could walk into a room and know where you sat 2 days ago in the room because of the pheromones and such that you left behind you, and they linger for days, and the dog would be able to figure out where you sat in the room. It's unbelievable. They had a guy who had a superpower. He could smell like an animal. So they subjected him to a test, which is the same test they subject drug-sniffing dogs to. They took him into a room with hundreds of books, and in one of the books, in between two of the pages, was a small amount of cocaine. A tiny amount of cocaine was in a little fold of paper, and it was in between two pages of a book in a room full of hundreds of books. The guy walked in the room, found the book, opened it up, found the pages, pulled out the thing, proving that he had the olfactory sense of an animal. That sense of smell is kind of predates vision and stuff like that. It's a real primitive way of navigating the world, negotiating through the world. And for certain animals, their sense of smell is so acute it becomes almost like a form of sight. Interestingly, if people become blind, then the areas of their brain which light up from vision within a few days begin to light up from smelling and hearing as neural networks are rewired, and you learn to use areas of your brain which had been established, neural networks which are established to process vision. They then get what do I want to say, repossessed and deployed to process smelling and hearing. Then if you return the sight to somebody, it goes back to processing sight, and it returns back within, almost immediately to what it was originally used for. Anyway, Vishaya means object. So an object of love would be called a Vishaya. And the lover is called the Ashray, and the object of love is called the Vishaya. Here, the term Vishaya is used for an object, but a very specific type of object, a sense object. And so the sense object it carries with it a bunch of philosophical baggage. And this is to repeat for you guys because I felt bad, but I think it's beneficial for everybody to hear it again. The word Vishaya, which is used here just as a standalone term, Vishaya vinivartante, the sense objects, they turn away. Vrit means to turn. Vinivrit means to turn away. Vinivartante means they turn away. The sense objects here are the subject of the sentence, and they're being described as turning away from you, but in actuality you turn away from them. It's a little bit poetic. And although I'm repeating this, I don't think you guys got it all the first 3 times I said it, so I don't think there's any harm in repeating it to you. There's a whole philosophical baggage which goes along with this term. And the baggage, or the worldview rather, is that you are a soul, you have a body, you are not your body, you are pure spirit. You misidentify with matter through your senses and get engulfed and infatuated by and engulfed in and overwhelmed by sense objects, which then become the focal point of your consciousness and turn you away from spirituality. And to learn to turn away from sense objects, to not let them overwhelm you, to not identify with them, to have a higher standard of how you hold your consciousness, that is in many ways either a precursor to or a part of self-realization. Because you got to look in the right direction, which means you're not looking in the wrong direction. All that's communicated by the term Vishaya. It's a whole worldview. And this whole idea, Vishaya has no exact translatable term in English. Even the term sense object fails, because without the paragraph I just spoke, and even spoke several times, you don't get it. And then once you get it, then there is no term in English which communicates this to anybody else on the planet, unless you've been taught, okay, the term we're going to use for that thing is sense object. Then we can all use the term as a specialized lexicon. But if we brought anybody into our group and we wanted to explain them what we meant by sense object, we'd have to go through the entire exercise I just went through with you. Because it's really a specialized term. Vishaya vinivartante nir aharasya dehina. The sense objects turn away from the fasting embodied soul. Now that's not what happens. Rather, we turn away from the sense objects. They don't turn away from us. But it's poetic. It's beautiful. Rasavarjam, except for your taste. Rasa means taste. Except, and varjam means except for. With the exception of the taste. So you can turn away from sense objects, just like in the illustration or the simile from the previous verse of a tortoise which withdraws its limbs and doesn't engage. And that's how you sit. Arjuna asked Krishna, how does he sit? How does the Stita Pragya Muni sit? How does the sage of steady wisdom sit? And Krishna answers, like a tortoise, withdrawing its limbs. That's how he sits in this world. He doesn't reach out in danger and get too infatuated with sense objects. Rather, she learns how to pull their appendages in to protect them by not identifying so much with the material world, by not engaging so much in the material world, by following the regular principles we follow, etc. Certain things we do and we don't do, certain things we identify with or we don't identify with. Certain foods we simply refrain from eating, or we refrain from eating too much, or we refrain from eating at night. It's just a straight refraining. Then there's also not living to eat, but instead eating to live. That's a little bit more not identifying so much with the food and not getting so... Even you're controlling your eating, if you're just like... First of all, that's going to just result in you overeating in the future. That kind of like... just really kind of Epicurean, gluttonous. Even if you're eating a small quantity, it's like this, like super like sensual. It's almost like, seems almost sexual. People who just like relish their food so much. There's just no doubt that in due course of time, if that's the way you view food and you live to eat, in due course of time, you're going to be eating too much and you're going to be eating the wrong stuff because you just identify with it too much. So on one hand, there's just the straight behavioral modifications of eat less and don't eat certain things like meat, fish, or eggs or whatever that we don't eat. And sometimes there's a lot of other things we don't eat too. This is like the small list, like the minimal list. There's all sorts of additional stuff you can choose not to eat. You can choose not to eat food cooked by non-devotees. I don't eat food cooked by non-devotees. And so that's a whole other thing. You can choose not to eat unoffered food. It's a whole other one. You can choose not to eat dairy from slaughterhouses. That's a whole other one. There's just all sorts of like areas where you can take it to the next step. But our bare bones minimum entry level restrictions are no meat, fish, or eggs. But then within that restricted eating, where you're avoiding killing living entities or torturing living entities for your diet unnecessarily, we still have to kill plants, torture plants, but unfortunately, jivo jivasya jivanam, there's no question that you're going to have to kill something. So at least we can just kill things without central nervous systems, without see neuron fibers that feel pain like we do. And we can eat lower on the karmic, make the smallest karmic footprint, pain footprint possible. But then there's also this really living to eat thing where you just identify with it so much, you're just all about it. And if that's your program, you're going to have problems. It's like the alcoholic who likes to go to the bar every night and sit at the bar and order drinks and have them sit in front of him. And he'd like hold it up to his mouth and put it down and like dip his tongue in it and then like put it away. It's like that's a bad play. That's not normal. Normally people who fall down into some addictive behavior that they don't want to engage in, there's a whole game you play where you think, oh, I'll just do a little bit of this and it won't be a problem. I'll just dip my toe in that. Just a little bit. Just touch it a little bit. Or I'll just drive to the bar. I'm not going to go in. I'll just drive there. I'll just go in to say hi to my friends. I'm not going to actually drink anything. I'll go in and say hi to my friends. I'll order myself a soda and kind of hang out, maybe some bitters in it or something like that. Maybe I'll order a drink, but I'm not going to drink it. Just to have it there, just as like a crutch, just to have it there. I'll just take a little sip. Just a little sip. Just one sip. I'm just one drink. What's one drink? And then, you wake up, pull your own vomit on the curb the next day or in bed with somebody who you don't even know or whatever. There's a whole game you play where you dabble. And so this over-identifying with sense objects, even if you don't engage with them, is a problem. It will straight up lead to eventually doing stuff you shouldn't be doing. But even independent of that, you're just sort of torturing yourself. You're like a masochist. And it's just not a healthy way to live. It's not normal. So Krishna anticipates this possible objection, and to complete his thought, he explains that you sit like a tortoise, but then he points out that just sitting like a tortoise isn't enough, because what doesn't go away even if you refrain from doing the forbidden action? The taste for it. This is very easy to understand. This is not difficult to understand. If you are celibate, does your taste for orgasm go away? You're all looking at me without, all along the entire class, you've been nodding your head or shaking your head. I asked this question, all of a sudden everybody looked at me like we're playing poker and you don't want to show me your hand. Let me just ask the question again. If you are celibate, does the taste for orgasm go away? No, it doesn't go away. It's controllable. It gets easier to control, but it certainly doesn't go away. Or if you fast, does your taste for food go away? It does not. It does not. You can become expert at fasting. But by itself, that fasting, although it will get easier, it doesn't remove the taste entirely. Rasavarjam, except for the taste. The senses turn away, the sense objects turn away, but the taste doesn't turn away. You follow? They're still flavorful, they're still delectable, they're still attractive to you. Rasa api asya. But even the taste. Param dristva. Once someone has seen something superior. Rasa varjam. Rasa api asya. Param drista nivartante. Even the taste, it turns away. For that person, asya, for him who has param dristva, has seen. Dristva means has seen. Param, something superior, something supreme. Prabhupada's translation. Though the embodied soul may be restricted from sense enjoyment, the taste for sense objects remains. But ceasing such engagements by experiencing a higher taste, he is fixed in consciousness. Let me say it again. Though the embodied soul may be restricted from sense enjoyment, the taste for sense objects remains. But ceasing such engagements by experiencing a higher taste, he's fixed in consciousness. What's actually said is, the taste also goes. That's literally what it says. The taste also goes. This happens. One thing is to remove the negative. Another thing is to achieve the positive. When you achieve the positive, then the deficiencies of the negative are no longer attractive because you found something better. Did you follow that? So step one is Step one is you learn to control your senses a little bit. And that's an austerity. You have to white knuckle it. You know what white knuckling it means? What does it mean?
It means you just grip on, hold on tight, keep pushing through.
Yeah, because when you grip onto something really tight, then there's no blood flow to your fingers, and so your fingers turn white. Did you guys know that that's where white knuckle comes from? It's pretty... If English is your first language, you should know that. You didn't know that, right? That's where you've heard white knuckling it, right? White knuckling it means you just hold on. And if you look at someone's hands who's just holding on, it's like for dear life. Their knuckles will turn white because there's no blood flow to them. Hence the term white knuckling it. So you gotta just hold on, stay strong, don't give up. There's no version of overcoming addiction that doesn't involve some degree of just straight up white knuckling. Just anybody who thinks it's easy has never overcome an addiction. Sometimes people say, oh, it's easy to give up. They're lying. They haven't given it up. Either A, they were never addicted, or B, they're lying to you that they haven't given it up. Anybody who's ever been addicted to something and overcome that addiction has at least a purple belt, at least an intermediate level belt in white knuckling it. Ease lovers, lazy people, soft people, weak people never overcome addiction, ever. You have to just white knuckle it. But that's not enough to really transcend addiction, to really put it to rest where it's never going to rear its ugly head again in a difficult time. You have to find something higher, find something realer, find something better. Sometimes you meet people like in a 12-step program and they'll be like, oh yeah, I'm a recovering alcoholic. You're like, how long have you been sober for? Like, oh, I've been sober for 32 years. Like, I've been sober for 33 years. Sometimes you meet people and they're like, how long have you been sober? Like, 33 years. Just one day at a time. I'm like, bro, it's not one day at a time for me. I never, ever, ever think about using drugs. Ever. Never happens. There's all sorts of stuff I never think about doing anymore. I gave it up, and now it's gone. I'm not plagued by it anymore. You break me down, give me an impossible situation, I don't go there. I go to Krishna. Hold on to Krishna. Hold on to my japa. Hold on to puja. Hold on to association with great souls. I'm not saying I'm perfect, but there are a number of things in my life that no longer plague me. They're no longer on the table. I no longer have to avoid them. They're just like the same way like when I walk by a gutter, I don't think, I'm going to drink out of that gutter. It's hard, I'm thirsty and there's water in the gutter and I'm just, I really got to really kind of control myself. It's just like it never occurs to me. I don't think about eating rocks, I'm not walking around seeing rocks and be like, oh, I should eat that rock. You follow? They're just, those things are no longer. Could you close that door for me, please? Thank you. So Krishna's like on an intermediate level, he's troubleshooting this phenomenon of how you restrain yourself in this world successfully. But it's not just about addictive things. It's about the whole material world. It's about your attachment to your children and your spouse and your money and your career and your intelligence and your beauty and your strength and your youth and your house and your car. It's about your attachments to all these things. The whole material kit and caboodle. The entire enchilada. The whole thing. You have to stop identifying with. Because there's no question that things are going to get taken away from you in this world. So if your happy place is having a bunch of material things, then there's just no question that you're going to suffer. To the extent that you identify with material things, to that extent you will suffer when those things are inevitably taken away. Even being attached to happiness is just a stupid idea. Because material happiness never endures. Ever. Inevitably. Bad things happen in life and rip away your happiness. And if you don't have a deeper place you go to that you're anchored to, that you actually get your sense of self from, like purpose, like integrity, like helping others, then in due course of time, your sensual delights will be ripped away from you. You'll wind up in a diaper. That's like a thing. People get old and they can't control their bowels. That's a thing. Can you imagine such a situation? Can you imagine wearing a diaper? That's like, I don't know what percentage of the population, I think it's like 20%, maybe 30% of the population ends up, and of course, the other question is, how many people over 80 wind up in a diaper, over 90 wind up in a diaper? You follow? So the longer you last, you're like, I want to live a long life, then your chances of winding up in a diaper start to go up and up and up. You get it? At a certain point, like, I want to live to be 100, you're like, okay, you're like a 75% chance of being in a diaper. Think about the things that get taken away from you. Your testosterone, your estrogen and estradiol, like everything gets taken away from you. Your ability to procreate, your strength, your intelligence. I mean, what percentage of people start slipping intellectually as they get past 70? So many of my gurus, who are all in their 70s and 80s now, when I meet them, I'm like, Hare Krishna Maharaj, I'm Tukaram Das. So happy. And they're like, yeah, the last time we spoke, we talked about this and that and the other thing. And we do a little dance where they remind me that they're still sharp and they remember everything. I just watched Radhanath Maharaj. He has 20,000 disciples. Some disciples came out to meet him. He's like, oh, it's been 5 years since I've seen you. How's your health? To the boy. And they're like, oh, we're much better. And I stopped him and I go, Maharaj is communicating to you that he knows you, remembers you, and remembers the health issue you had 5 years ago when you last met. And that he's been praying for you. And Maharaj's like, yes, I've been praying for you regularly. I'm glad you're feeling better. Like there's a little, you don't do that with somebody who's 40 or 50. It's a little game you play with somebody when they're 70 or 80, where you just kind of check. You raise your voice, you talk louder. Isn't it? So this idea of you're going to get all attached to your senses and your sense objects and processing the world through your sense objects, and that's where you're going to find your happiness, it's just a terrible model for life. Because we know that does not long endure. What does endure? Your integrity. Your piety, your depth, your selflessness, your commitments. By the time you have lost your mind, you've already earned your black belt many times over. You're a red belt. People are worshiping the ground you walk on. You follow? You live your life as a saint, your mind goes. You never go back and then you go drink or do something terrible like that. You just chant Hare Krishna and forget the mantra by the time you finish it, but then you start again, so it's no big deal. What to speak of the fact that a pious life ends up almost ensuring that you're not going to wind up infantilized in your old age. We have a really healthy lifestyle for ensuring some degree of intellectual fortitude into your later years. So Krishna's making kind of a very standard spiritual argument, which is that you need to turn away from sense objects. You need to turn away from material things. You need to not derive your happiness from material things. If you do derive your happiness from material things, you're going to suffer. And now that you've accepted that you shouldn't derive your happiness from material things, you now have to turn away from them because they're a little addictive and you get a little enmeshed in them. So you got to learn the art of turning away, the art and the science of turning away from them. And as you do that, you won't get rid of the taste. To get rid of the taste, you have to find something positive, something higher, like purpose, instead of sensual pleasure. And that when you go to that higher place, that positive place, that deeper place, then the taste for low-class things leaves you. You become attracted to goodness. You find goodness and depth and loyalty and integrity and honor to be attractive. Commitment. You start to become attracted to those things in life. And then the lower stuff is just, it's passé. It's either repulsive or not enticing, and just not even an issue. This is the meaning of this verse. And it's an addendum to and an extension of the last verse where the simile was given of the tortoise pulling in its limbs. And Krishna saying, that's not it, you got to see something higher. And then, though the embodied soul may be restricted from sense enjoyment, the taste for sense objects remains. But ceasing such engagement, by experiencing a higher taste, he's fixed in consciousness and the taste goes. It's interesting, but the verse says seeing something higher, but Prabhupada says experiencing a higher taste. But there's nothing about a higher taste. It says having seen something higher. Drish means to see. Drishtva means having seen. Param, the supreme, something higher, something superior. And so I was thinking about this. Prabhupada says experiencing a higher taste, which of course is the name of my restaurant, Higher Taste. So I named my restaurant Higher Taste from this verse. That's where the name of my restaurant comes from. In fact, I have a sign in my restaurant that says experience a higher taste. I put up a sign in my restaurant that says experience a higher taste. That's this experiencing a higher taste. Here's directly where that name comes from. It's Prabhupada's idiosyncratic and novel translation of this param dristva, having seen something higher. And I was thinking about it, how Prabhupada doesn't do an exact translation. He says experiencing a higher taste, but the verse doesn't say that. The verse says seeing something higher. Do you follow that? So that would appear to be Prabhupada going off on a little poetic flight of fancy in his translation work and not being really tight and literal. which isn't necessarily bad. Krishna's a little poetic in the verse, so Prabhupada gets a little poetic with his translation work. No sweat. But I thought about it. When I named my restaurant, I thought about it. The entire structure of the verse is about the taste for sense objects. The sense objects will turn away from you, but the taste will remain. But the taste will leave you when you see something higher. Does the taste leave you? Does taste leave you when you see something higher? No, taste leaves you when you taste something higher. Therefore, although Krishna uses the word drishtva, which means having seen something higher, in the context of the verse, because the subject of the verse is your taste for sense objects and its presence or absence, then the only way to properly translate functionally what Krishna is trying to communicate is that having tasted something higher, having experienced a higher taste. And because sight is such a prominent sense, sometimes seeing something is used as a synonym for tasting something or smelling something, and then you're left to look at the verse to see what the subject of the sentence is, and then you know which sense to plug in. Did you follow that? So from that point of view, Prabhupada becomes an incredibly expert translator, because he was able to break free from the literal structure of the verse, and he was able to functionally translate what the verse would have communicated to a native Sanskrit speaker. Because the sight being the most prominent sense, and sometimes sight is listed even though it's referring to another sense. And in this case, what we're talking about is taste, a flavor of something, rasa. And so then if the rasa is there and the rasa goes away, if the flavor goes away, why does the flavor go away? Because you tasted something higher, and therefore experiencing a higher taste is a really clean translation. And it's that expert translation where it breaks from a literal translation, which would be less intelligible, and takes a functional translation where the idiosyncrasies of a language and the idiomatic phraseology of a language is transplanted intact. And the example I always give to communicate this is entre en la espada y el pared, right? La pared. Entre en la espada y la pared. You enter in between the sword and the wall, which is a Spanish idiomatic phrase. And in English we say, you're in between a rock and a hard place. The rock is the jagged, which is a sword in Spanish. And the hard place is the wall. And so it's a semi-slang, idiomatic phrase that makes sense to the native speakers. But if you want to translate entre en la espada y la pared into English, the proper translation would be you're between a rock and a hard place. Not you're between a sword and a wall, which would just confuse people. They might be able to work it out, but it wouldn't quite make sense to people. Prabhupada's doing that kind of translation work here. And let's look at one more verse. Or maybe even two. The senses are so strong and impetuous that they forcibly carry away the mind of even the man of discrimination. Narayan's much better with her. The senses are so strong and impetuous that they forcibly carry away the mind of even the man of discrimination who is endeavoring to control them. The senses. Yatato hyapi kaunteya purushasya vipaschitaha indriyani pramatini. Indriyani means the senses. They are pramatini, they are destructive. They're destructive. And so these Indriyani pramatini, these destructive, agitating, disturbing senses, What do? Haranti. They take away. Like the word Hari for Krishna means one who takes away. Hare, one who takes away. It says Haranti. They take away. What takes away? The senses. They take you away. Because they get attracted to the sense object and they take away. What do they take away? Prasabham. They forcibly take away. Mana, your mind. They just addict your mind and they take your mind to a dark place. Forcibly. Because they're just so disturbing. Whose mind do they take away? Vipaschitaha purushasya. They take away the mind of even a man of discrimination. Vipaschitaha means an insightful person. An insightful human. Obviously this would include a woman as well. Although it's in the masculine case, it would also include a woman. Yatanto hiapi. Even though he's striving, even though you're striving, even though you're discriminating and discerning, still the senses take you away. Therefore, you need to find something higher. I'm just looking for a little happiness. Yeah, that's a bad goal in life. Because happiness doesn't long endure. You're going to go through plenty of suffering times in your life. Plenty of difficult times in your life. There are a ton of times in your life you're going to be suffering. And the very existence of suffering means you're not happy. That's what suffering means. Now, suffering with purpose is sacrifice. Suffering for a higher cause is sacrifice. But if your cause is material pleasure, sensual pleasure, which is what most people think of when they think of happiness, you're miserable. You've got to find your happiness and your joy in something deeper, in meaning, in helping other people. That's another thing. When you think about yourself, it's been proven in a number of tests that when you are thinking about yourself, your thoughts become more negative over time. And when you think about other people, your thoughts become more positive. Therefore, a cure for depression and sadness is to constantly think of other people's welfare. It's like a miracle cure for depression. Just to focus on other people instead of yourself. Because when you focus on yourself, it's like quicksand. Your thoughts naturally become more negative over time. How crazy is that? And when you think about other people, they don't. Selflessness, purpose, integrity, depth, honor, commitment. Those are anchors which can survive the maelstrom of happiness and distress and sensual delights and difficulties, which is going to encircle and overwhelm every person in due course of their life. And if you don't get there, you're in the water. And those whirlpools hit and you get sucked down, you get spit out, sucked down, spit out, and you're on the roller coaster. Because the senses are really strong. And even if you're striving to control them, even if you're a discerning person, unless you've actually experienced something higher. Radhanath Maharaj gave a class 30 years ago. And he said that even before you see Krishna, if you have loving relationships with the devotees, you'll never fall down. Because your commitment to them and your love for them and your appreciation for them and your community with them will be such that you will be able to withstand temptations. You need to find something higher. Ultimately, you need to find something really deep. So even when your body gets taken away, it doesn't freak you out. Even when your body disintegrates, it doesn't freak you out. You're able to stay strong. But we can start. You start. You know, it's like, we don't fight for the generals. We fight for the man next to us. And when you're in war, You're fighting for the guy next to you, not for some illustrious, deep principle or purpose. It gets gritty enough where you got to just focus on the people immediately surrounding you. That's an entry level of depth that everybody, they're following, I should also follow. They're staying strong, I also need to fall strong. They've invested in me and seen the best in me. I got to rise up to that occasion and become worthy of their trust. It's an entry level higher taste. And you build on that. You start to have some spiritual experiences. You build on that and start to actually have some experiences of Krishna. Through the holy name, through the deity, and eventually you have experiences of Krishna, and then unless you make some really huge mistake, you don't fall down anymore. And so you get here, Krishna's just like, he's giving an analysis of the slaughterhouse nature of the material world. It's a dangerous place. And there's a way to get to a safe spot, and that safe spot is experiencing something spiritual. So you get these people from AA, they're like, I'm just one step away from drinking. You're like, really, dude? Like that, like 30 years later, you're still just like on like level 1? just white knuckling it like 30 years in? Really? Like that sucks. We white knuckle and we just hand over hand, we get to those better places. It starts with the community. It starts with the man next to you, the woman next to you, your fellow devotees who are also following. And so how can you not follow? They're following, you should follow too. They're being their best selves, you should be your best self too. Tani sarvani samyamya. All these senses under control. Samyama is samadhi, dharana, and dhyana, the last 3 angas of Ashtanga Yoga. If you guys are familiar with Ashtanga Yoga, samyama is all 3 of those together. It's a technical term used in the yoga literature. I don't believe Krishna's using it. The Gita predates the Yoga Sutras, but I think he's using it in a more general sense. Samyama means complete restraint. Completely restraining all these senses. Yukta asita mat padaha. The yogad person, the yoked person, the yogad person sits with me as the highest object. This is a really interesting point in the Gita. Asita, he sits. Asana, he sits. With me as the highest object. The yogad person. Controlling all his senses, he sits with me as the highest object. She sits with me. She should sit with me. It's in the optative. They should sit with me as the highest object. Vashe hi yasya indriyani tasya pragya pratishtita. For that person whose senses are under control, vashe, they're in control. Vasha means control, vashe means in control. Indriyani, their senses are in control. Yasya, for that person, tasya, for him, pragya pratishtita. His wisdom is firmly established. Again, Arjuna's question was, what does this person who's firmly established, what do they look like, what do they talk like, how they sit? And Krishna's saying, keeping the senses, all these senses under full control, the yoked one sits with me as the highest object. And for one who's able to control his senses in this way, with me as the highest object, pragya pratishtita, tasya pragya pratishtita, his wisdom stands firm. Did you guys see the incredibly brilliant, earth-shattering, powerful theological point that Krishna just made? I didn't explicate it. I said it, but I didn't shine a spotlight on it. Did you guys catch it? You caught it, Dom?
I think so.
What is it?
For the not so advanced yogi, they're able to withdraw their senses, but they're still in a precarious situation because they haven't experienced something higher. But for one who
You're in the ballpark. Everything you said is correct. I agree with everything you said. Here's the eureka point. Krishna just said you have to experience something higher. That's a very generic statement. We're in a pre-theistic section of the Gita. Krishna's not introduced himself as God thus far in the Gita. Krishna hasn't even introduced God at all thus far in the Gita. We have no reference of a Lord, of a creator of the universe. We are in a section of the Gita where all that Krishna's discussed so far is Sankhya, you're not the body, and yoga, do your duty but don't be attached. And Krishna just introduced this idea of see something higher, having seen something higher. Right? What is that higher thing that you're supposed to see? Krishna. Krishna has just introduced a theological goal of the Gita. He's just told you what the highest thing you're supposed to attach yourself to. And he said that that's how you sit. So we've been told to sit like a tortoise withdrawing its limb, but that won't get rid of the taste. You have to see something higher to get rid of the taste. You have to have a higher taste in order to get rid of the lower taste. And what is that higher taste? That higher taste is Krishna. Yukta asita matpadaha. Sitting with me as the highest object. He even uses the term sitting. This is how you sit. You're supposed to sit like a tortoise? No. You're supposed to sit with me as the highest object, and that's the higher taste, and that enables you to give up the lower taste. And that is ultimately what it means to be wise. And Krishna has just introduced straight theology, theism, into the Gita. It's super slick. Slick enough where you might not have seen it. It is a huge, massive change in the Gita. Because every chapter of the Gita is filled with bhakti. Every chapter of the Gita, its mountain peak, its highest teaching, its highest principle is bhakti, the loving, graceful relationship between the soul and God, a relationship of devotion from us, and a relationship of grace coming down. And even in these early chapters of the Gita, even in the beginning of the Gita, you see that has just been introduced. And in fact, it's the solution to the entire conundrum. Did you see it now? So you weren't wrong, but you didn't nail that point. I want to notice a theological shift using the idea of how you sit, what it means to see the higher truth, that Krishna is that higher truth, and he just introduced himself as the object of the devotee's focus, which empowers them to then give up their focus on lower things. A positive spiritual attachment to the personality of Godhead, Krishna. Even before he says he's God. Just, he throws in it, you focus on me. Even before he's identified himself as God. And of course, then when you read the whole Gita and you come back, he's like, wow, Krishna was seeding the text. He was foreshadowing. Brilliant literary devices were being thrown in the text using precise language. This is how you sit. Showing that the whole thing is connected. All these verses are connected. Eventually this becomes, Daivahi Shagunamai Mama Maya Duraya. Mam eva ye prapadyante mayametam tarantite. That the material, the gunas are impossible to overcome. They're very difficult to overcome. But if you take shelter of me, you can cross them. If you come to me, you can cross them. They become more explicit statements. But it's just as tasty. It's just as deep. It's just as profound. It's just as theological. It's just as powerful. It's such a massive shift in the Gita. And Krishna slides it right in there, all slick. So that there's not a single chapter in the Gita that doesn't have really deep, beautiful theism within it. Thank you very much, IGTV.